Hello, Gorillas. This is episode 2, season 4 of Gorilla Opera Podcast. My name is Tae Kim, Ensemble pianist, and I'll be your host for this episode. As you might have noticed, the last podcast was erroneously labeled as the 5th episode of season 3 rather than the first episode of our new 4th season. My apologies for the error. Today, we're here with Curtis Hughes to talk about, well, making a sandwich. Thank you for joining us today. Your first collaboration with Gorilla Opera was Seirein Sojo, a light tragedy reimagining the vice presidential debate between Sarah Palin and Joe Biden in the 2008 election. Aside from the obvious difference in the topic, what was the experience like the second time around with Gorilla in Let's Make a Sandwich?
Well, it was certainly good to have the memory and the experience of having collaborated with Gorilla Opera once before on a larger scale project. Although this project shared with the older project that it was quite strange in its conception, a odd concept to try to implement. But at the same time, knowing who I was working with, both in terms of the organization and in terms of the individuals, really helped give me the confidence to do some things that I otherwise wouldn't have dared to attempt, both sort of musically and dramatically. It was such a wonderful idea to kind of highlight the role of a director in a production by having two different directors direct the same material. And I was excited about that from the get-go, but we needed to come up with raw material to kind of link the whole thing together. So I was thrilled to be involved in the early discussions where we settled on a very strange common point of reference, which was this informational film about how to make a tuna fish sandwich, an open-faced tuna fish sandwich, I should clarify.
Okay. A rare bit, apparently.
Right, yeah, tuna rarebit.
Yep.
And I have to credit a former student of mine who's a fantastic composer by the name of Ethan Parcell, who, as a first-year undergraduate student, wanted to compose some music to sort of go along with this film that he had found on YouTube. Ultimately, a project he did not pursue, although he has pursued many very interesting projects since then. Suddenly that film came back to mind a couple of years later when Gorilla Opera was searching for subject matter. And I kind of brought it up, not necessarily thinking it would be taken all that seriously. And then, Rudy seemed interested, Mike seemed interested, everyone in the organization seemed on board with it. So I did check in with my former student and confirmed that he had no plans to do anything with this material. Although if he had, I'm sure it would have been something completely different from what Rudy did and what I did. That's how it got started.
Wow. How was that process, coming up with an opera just based on that 4-minute infomercial?
Well, it felt, I certainly separated the process of writing the libretto from that of writing the music. In the past, sometimes I've gone back and forth. When I'm not collaborating with a poet or a librettist or somebody who's writing words, if I'm supplying the words, which is something I'm not always comfortable doing, it's often a back and forth. Some music, some words, try to make them fit together. But this, I sort of wrote what felt like a short play, like a very, very compact one-act play, and then proceeded to set it to music and felt free to make many changes to it as the music seemed to compel me to do. I'm not a playwright. I'm not really much of an opera librettist, but for some reason with this subject matter, writing the libretto was amazingly quick and sort of not too strained. Partly because I think I knew that Gorilla Opera would throw themselves into realizing this with such conviction that it could be quite strange and sort of both darkly tragic and comic at the same time,
right.
And that everybody would be comfortable with that. I think there was some Samuel Beckett in the mix as I was trying to write maybe some Ionesco, Carol Churchill, certainly, other playwrights who I'm familiar with, who I think probably informed what I was doing a little bit.
I mean, it flows so nicely for sure. I mean, but of course, the two directors had a complete, different takes on it. Did having those directors affect the writing itself? Not necessarily the libretto. I guess maybe the libretto too. But did that having that in the back of your mind, did that affect the compositional process?
Yes, I'm not sure if I knew who both of the directors were going to be at first. Eventually I knew, and I knew Copland from his work with Guerrilla Opera on prior productions, though I hadn't worked with him personally. And I had never met Giselle before. It was great to work with her. They had such incredibly different approaches. It's probably good that I'd had this experience once before of writing an opera with a fair amount of stage direction, in which the stage direction wound up being changed quite a bit in performance. So that although I was imagining the staging quite specifically and precisely while I was coming up with the material, I also knew that it probably would be changed. Mm-hmm. I'm sort of thrilled that what happened was there was one interpretation that was more or less true to what I had written, okay, in a sort of a straightforward, comprehensible way, right, and one which was more sort of aggressively defying what was on the page. Those two kind of played off of each other in a way that interested me a lot. I wouldn't have wanted to miss out on that contrast.
Right. I would think an opera will have multiple directors in its lifetime, but not necessarily on the same night, same stage, and the same cast. Right. What was that like, working with two directors simultaneously?
As I recall, I was, I think, purposely not involved in the early stages of the production being put together. Okay. Which is probably good. It's probably too many cooks in the kitchen. Right. But as I recall, the directors did not interact. They may have had rehearsals on the same days, I'm not sure, but they certainly weren't at the same time. The rehearsals were not concurrent. Only the cast knew really in detail what was going on in both versions. The instrumentalists had some idea, but were, I think, visually focused on learning their parts and exactly trying to stay together, so they weren't able to entirely watch how things were playing out on stage. So the actors did, the singers, the cast did an amazing job of keeping it to themselves. Maybe they discussed it among themselves, but they did not, for instance, let on to Giselle what Copland was up to, and they didn't let Copland know what Giselle was up to.
Oh, wow.
So, it could have happened that both directors might have done something very similar.
Right.
But the ways in which these productions played off of one another was something that I think everyone was purposely kept in the dark about until late in the process, which I think was by design. I think that was part of the idea. It's let's make a sandwich, but it's also sort of let's make a sandwich where, one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing.
Right. That's fascinating. That's definitely fascinating. So when did you actually come into play in the production? It must have been towards the end then. Did you end up just seeing the final product?
Well, in a sense, I had no meaningful involvement in the production. I was there to, correct musical mistakes and things like that, make sure everything was as I, catching errors that I might have made in the score, for instance. Right. But more or less, it was just my helplessly watching it play out, which was kind of it was really a totally unique experience in my professional life, and a really wonderful experience. Not easy at times because, I remember one time when I think Giselle said to me, "I'm going to mutilate your aria." And the funny thing is, I think she intended on sort of preparing me psychologically for how much her direction was going to sort of be different from what I might have foreseen. And I was disturbed by that comment at first, but at the same time I had seen, right, exactly. But I had at the same time seen Copland's version coming together. And so I knew that whatever happened to the aria in one case, it was going to be not the only time we heard it. And the mutilation she was referring to involved ketchup and bread and other things.
Right.
But it did seem to me there was one thing that I had involvement in later on in the phase during which I was mostly helpless. I did feel that there was a logic to Copland's version being presented first, and then we would hear Giselle's version. And even making that declaration, I think, went to some degree against the spirit of the project, which was to kind of allow things to play out without that sort of intervention.
Right.
But I think that it was a good decision to do it that way.
Right. Right. How was the experience different from Seirin Sojo?
Different again in that I knew more about who I was working with.
Okay.
And I could rely on knowing that things I had tried out in Seirin Sojo could still work, or similar sort of technical things could work. Also, a much smaller piece of work for me. I mean, it's a less than 20 minutes of music, so as opposed to 70 minutes of music. So it was a very focused process for me. Fewer singers, fewer instrumentalists.
Right.
There was the added element of the pre-recorded electronic sound, which gave it a different feeling. I think it's really important for people to see the "Let's Make a Sandwich" video beforehand, otherwise they'll have no context.
I want to say I don't think I've seen that video, because I remember, because I mean, as an ensemble pianist, I'm just given a score. So
right.
I play, right. I do the rhythm, I try to get the notes, and I try to get the singers together, and that's all I see. And the next time I see them is the final production, And then I remember seeing it, I'm just kind of going, this is bizarre. What does this have to do with Let's Make a Sandwich? And I never thought to think that I should have watched that YouTube video. So before this interview, I ended up watching the video, and I'm like, oh, it makes sense now.
Right. Yeah, both Rudy's opera and mine are definitely sequels in a sense to the video.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't feasibly make "quote unquote" an opera literally for that 4 minutes infomercial.
Right.
I guess one could possibly, but it'll be too short of an opera. But it was just I remember the feeling of watching that show live. I was so dumbfounded, but I mean in awe too, just because everything was so vastly different, in so many ways.
If there are a substantial proportion of people who are in the audience who hadn't seen the video beforehand, I imagine they were extremely disoriented. I think that's in any future presentation of it. I think that's an absolutely essential ingredient. Yes.
But to be honest, that didn't really bar from enjoying the pieces. To be honest, just because it was just because productions were just so convincing, and they were so different, even though the music was exactly the same. Mm-hmm. And you're just kind of thinking, wow, this is fascinating. It's so fascinating how two people can have such vastly different ideas and a single entity, in a sense. That's why I thought both productions were so really successful, in a sense that they evoke such wide ranges of emotions from the audience. Well, what are your thoughts for the two productions?
If I try to imagine what it would be like if I didn't know the music and I didn't know the libretto, and certainly if that were the case, then the first of the two is the one that I would be able to make more sense of, which again is, I think, why it was good that it was the first of the two. But really wonderful decision on the part of Guerrilla Opera to pick two directors with such different sensibilities, I think, for that reason. If I had seen the second version of the opera first, Giselle's version, I know I would have enjoyed some of the complete sort of surreal disorientation I would have experienced.
Right.
But I think I especially appreciated that, having had a little bit more sort of ground to stand on in the first version. But Copeland also was able to sort of play up some of the slapstick in a way that I really appreciated.
Right.
There was a certain amount of almost comic timing built into the music, and that sort of is invariable. And I loved finding out that different directors could make different flavors of comedy out of that comic, out of those moments, without actually having to change anything in the score.
I thought they were so wonderfully done. What were some of the most enjoyable moments?
Many enjoyable moments. So that first discussion with Giselle certainly is memorable. The line I already quoted to you. I'm going to mutilate your aria. She knew.
I wonder if you're ever gonna hear such from a director.
It was, it sounds like a sort of I think when I've told that story before, it sounds like I'm trying to garner sympathy, but in fact, it was a wonderful moment in many ways. I was unsettled by it, but I was also, kind of excited to find out, what does that mean?
Right.
I enjoyed witnessing the sort of befuddlement of the instrumentalists as they gradually became aware of what kind of mayhem was going on around them and was going to be going on around them. Watching it sort of dawn upon them, especially as they had, to varying degrees, roles sort of in the drama. They became incorporated into it in a certain way. I thought it was fun to see that play out.
Of course.
But also getting to know Rudy's opera, and hearing it over and over and over again, because I tended, I think I heard his opera 10 times, including multiple rehearsals of the different versions over the course of the last 10 days or so. And the way in which I started to hear linkages between the two operas musically, which of course were also fortuitous, not planned. That was sort of fun to start to hear those things, and to see how the different characterizations, I think, were influencing each other across the different operas and the different productions of them.
Wow. Biggest challenges?
In composing, or in
anything.
Sort of the production phase?
Production, composing. I would imagine composing could not have been easy either. I mean, especially going off of that 4-minute video about making a tuna sandwich.
Yes. Coming up with the idea for how to make a kind of a short play as a sequel to that it was more deciding what not to do and narrowing it down that was difficult. That was not overall a lot of turmoil in generating that part of it, but then the follow through, making it sort of musically cogent in the ways that I wanted it to be, and sort of scattered in the ways that I also wanted it to be. Certain things that I had trouble figuring out how to notate that I hadn't tried before. With all of the sort of comical music involving the man in the sandwich shop, who Brian Church depicts, who is sort of adding confusion to the scene. There's this thing that keeps happening with almost a drum beat accompanying him that is always playing in the wrong tempo relative to the rest of the music. So just a bit of a technical challenge for figuring out how to notate some of these things that I wanted to have happen. And then I'm not all that experienced as a composer of electronic music. I've dabbled in electronic music for more than 20 years, almost always without being satisfied with what I've come up with. I think I've got one composition for pre-recorded sound and solo instrument that I'm actually happy with, and everything else I've thrown out the window. So coming up with electronic sound for this that was intended to be somewhat evocative of the time of the original videos, almost to sound like electronic experimental music of the 1950s, was an interesting challenge. I wound up finding a mock software platform that sort of mimicked a 1950s era electronic music studio, and was using very basic building blocks like sine waves and things to create something that hopefully would sound dated in the right way.
Very cool, very cool. I mean, it definitely added another dimension to the opera. I felt, especially from the Copland point of view, I thought the opera felt linear in some ways, but the electronics helped coming out of that linearness. That was really, yeah, I really thought it was really well done, and to be completely honest with you. And of course, Giselle's take on that same effect was a whole nother way of adding another spice to already, what was it? I guess the bizarre way of understanding the word sandwich, I guess. Yeah, it's marvelous. Do you have anything else to add to the opera?
Well, I know that you're interviewing me rather than the other way around, but I am curious whether it's something you want to talk about. I mean, you've been responsible for making many miracles happen with productions that are, coming together on a tight timetable. And I'm wondering what your experience was a little bit, and what were the challenge. I'm curious about what you found to be most challenging in this instance.
I think when it comes to my job is pretty simple. I always get the score whenever they said they're going to send the score. So I get the score and I cry a little bit because I have to all those lines and try to play them on the piano. But like I said, it was just, everything is just so bare bone what I do, as in I rehearse with the singers and that's it. Maybe Mike will be there to kind of help with the rhythm here and there, but I'll be just sitting there, getting the notes down, getting the rhythm down, make sure that the singers are ready to go to rehearse with the instrumentalists. So I don't get to see any staging, nothing.
Okay.
Nothing, not at all. So I see them as just, just regular people, and I see them on the street. And then I go to the show. That's my next step. And I go to the show. I'm just always just blown away by, how they the production of it. And it's just because it's always from the very beginning, and I don't see any of the process in the middle, and then I see the end, and it just blows my mind all the time. And with especially something like this, I remember. I'm trying to remember. I remember getting both scores, and I knew Rudy beforehand, but even then, just kind of trying to see how they how both of the pieces were different in so many ways, obviously. But I could kind of find some of the links here and there, and I'm kind of thinking, that's actually pretty fascinating, having to come from a singular source as a 4-minute infomercial. And there's that linkage, and I'm sure it's not as if you guys sat in the same table and be like, okay, we're going to link this together. And that wasn't the case, but it was just really fascinating to see even the little snippets of commonalities between the two pieces. And it's just, it was just a lot of fun, especially just because it's about the same subject, but completely different take on it. And now, of course, many years later, I have better understanding of, especially after watching that video. I'm like, oh, okay, a rare bit. I get it. But yeah. So putting the spotlight back to you, with the looming presidential election, are you writing another opera based on upcoming debates?
I am not. But I am intrigued by the opportunity to hear and see Joe Biden in a debate, in a one-on-one debate context like that. Again, so it's sort of a musical interest among other things, but no, that was something to do once, and I get asked that question a lot.
I'm sure.
And it's not something. I'm so glad that my second opportunity to collaborate with Guerrilla Opera was something so totally different.
Right. Because I mean, I don't know how true this might be, but in history class, music history class, I remember learning about Dmitri Shostakovich, and he is always introduced as the 20th century political composer. And
Mhm.
and I'm thinking something like this, when you tackle on, something like a presidential debate, and especially now when the state of the country is like this, then
Yeah.
you are, I guess you are end up being labeled in that sense as a quote unquote the political composer. Were you ever labeled as something as such after that opera?
I even labeled myself as such quite some years beforehand.
Oh, okay.
I was in the early aughts. I was writing music that I considered to be political. I even was the co organizer of a political music small scale festival of sorts on two occasions, and realized that was not something I did not want to write music that sort of had a polemic kind of aspect to it. Uh, by the time I wrote Say It Ain't So, Joe, I was very interested in political subject matter, but not in espousing a particular political view, even though I have strong political views.
Yeah.
I don't. To me, let's make a sandwich is not a political statement. Neither is Say It Ain't So, Joe. But they're
I do
informed by
prefer closed
politics.
sandwich, know.
Right. Yes, exactly right. That's the debate we need to have.
Right? Would you like it open or do you like it closed?
I
But
remember
yeah.
going to I remember on one of these concerts of political music that I helped to put together. This was during the George W. Bush years.
Right.
Um, sorry about the car alarm we're hearing nearby.
It's okay.
There was a composition for solo bass drum. No, I think it was bass drum and saxophone by another composer that was incredibly abrasive and acoustically, just sonically very, very interesting. And I was really enjoying hearing it during the dress rehearsal. It was, fortissimo bass drum hits and screaming multiphonics and very harsh and to my ear very interesting. And then during the concert, the composer introduced the piece saying, "This piece is about McCarthyism." And I sort of all of a sudden felt deflated. It suddenly took away so much from what the music. All of a sudden, the music was merely an expression of rage about McCarthyism.
Right,
uh,
right.
Not exactly timely rage, given it's the early 2000s, but if somebody wants to if somebody wants to write music where the possibility is encouraged to sort of read these things into it, I think that's great.
Right.
But I'm not wanting to be, as a listener or as a composer, constrained by a particular, very specific political sentiment.
Right, right, right. I definitely felt, especially going from the Seirin Sojo to Let's Make a Sandwich. I mean, that has to be, that's a different road, man. I mean, I have to say, one's a complete, shall I say, a serious, a topic. And I'm not saying, Tuna Rarebit is not a serious topic, but did you feel like you had to cleanse yourself from the political writing of an opera?
I suppose maybe to some degree. I wrote a piece of chamber music. It was a sextet after Say It Ain't So, Joe, called Verbiage, which used melodic lines that were transcriptions of political speeches in a way similar to what I had done in the opera, although without the voices. Elizabeth Warren, actually, one of my transcriptions that I used. And I thought I was getting away from being political by simply using that as musical material and not using the recordings of the politicians. I've subsequently decided if that piece is ever going to be performed again, I actually should use the recordings of the politicians, make it a little clearer what I was trying to do. But certainly it was refreshing to write something operatic that did not in an overt way touch on politics.
Right, right. And not to mention, I love tuna sandwich. I don't know about you. I hope you like tuna sandwich too. But
As it happens, I do, but I think there is actually a political. There's a lot of politics of the time. This video as a cultural artifact contains.
that is true.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's an infomercial of sorts.
Right.
They didn't have the term back then, but
Right.
it seems to me that they're trying to find the way to prepare a tuna sandwich that requires the maximum labor for a woman in the kitchen. And it's not an easy, it's not a quick way to make a tuna fish sandwich. There are easier ways to go about it.
Yep. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, it's I remember watching the video. Finally, I'm just kind of thinking, things were pretty, different back then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty different back then.
The patronizing tone of the announcer and everything else.
Yeah, but that was what, 70 years ago. My goodness, 70 years ago. Do you want to talk about anything else? Do you have any other projects coming up that you're excited about that you want to share?
It's difficult always to know what to compose when we don't know what live performance is going to look like in the near future. But I've got older, longer term projects that are coming to fruition. CD project that's coming out in March. Maybe that'll be around the time that we start getting back to live performance as well. But there is one vocal work on that disc that is neither political nor absurdist in quite the way. It's a Twin Peaks inspired composition that I wrote a couple of years ago. It sets some text from Proust, but it's really about Twin Peaks, the TV show. Not that you have to be a fan of the show in order to make sense of the music. In that case, I wouldn't ask people to watch dozens of hours of television in order to prepare to listen to it. The piece is called Tulpa. The disc will be coming out in March on New Focus. At least I believe it will. Yeah.
Beautiful. How did COVID affect your writing? For me, as a pianist, I had ups and downs. There's some good days where I could have a lot of motivation, inspiration to practice, to get to know, to learn more. But there's some down days where it just becomes kind of like, when am I going to perform? Who am I going to perform for? And it's when I don't have the answer to those questions, it becomes kind of discouraging. I wonder if you have the similar experience during this trying times.
Yes, it's really fun to have this conversation right now. It's a high point. It's a bright spot in the middle of a lot of isolation to get to talk as musicians. And I like to maintain the bright tone, but really it's hard to say anything that's too positive about doing creative work right now. Right. I have not found it to be an inspiring time. I need some isolation to be a good composer or to be, consistently creative. But this is not even knowing what the future holds makes it very difficult to know what to do. So I've written some solo pieces. I've written some small scale things. It's not. It's a good time for revising old pieces, sort of taking stock.
Yeah.
It's a great time for self-doubt.
Yeah.
Great time for second guessing oneself.
About it. Oh my goodness. I think this might be a little depressing, but I think the question I've been asking is, what's the point? What's the point of doing this? But I think one thing that kind of gets me going and is that every 2 weeks, Guerrilla Opera, we have a Zoom meeting, and we say meeting, but it's more kind of like, hey, how are you guys doing? How's everybody doing? And it's to talk about how essentially our lives during those 2 weeks, and just to see how we can sustain this kind of work in the trying times. And but the problem, not the problem, but the great thing about those kind of conversations is that one, you get to talk to people, and because socialization is definitely needed. I do feel. I mean, as much as I do feel, and as a pianist, I do feel like isolation. And I'm sure for you as a composer, we both need some sort of isolation to do our work. But like you said, during this time, it becomes, when the future is just so muddy and so murky, it just becomes really difficult to um, concentrate per se, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But having to talk to Gorilla Opera and how they are coming up with all these projects, so that it kind of keeps me going in some ways too, just to see how I can do more to inspire and motivate, not just me, but others as well. And that's one of the reasons why, I kind of threw myself out there to do a podcast, even though I sincerely, I sincerely hate my voice, and to say the least. So it's just kind of like,
I think that's a universal. I think everybody is shocked by the sound of their own voice.
Right? This is why I don't listen to recordings, because I say that's fake news. It's all fake news. No, but
it has been a great. No, sorry. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, it has been a great time for thinking back on live performances that have been especially exciting, and from all recent and going back some years. I was thinking recently of a performance that you and Aliana did some years ago of a big song cycle by Andy Voris.
And Cleopatra.
It was a intimate crowd, and I don't remember what time of year it was, but I seem to think
that was Super Bowl. I want to say what I remember.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think we got
it. Could be.
I don't think that we as in the Patriots got in. So because I remember I did a concert with Aliana. Yeah, I think it was Super Bowl.
It was an extraordinary concert. It was just it's just one of my favorite sort of live music memories to turn back to.
Well, thank you. My goodness. But she's wonderful, man. She a couple of years ago, we did a concert over at what was it, the Boston Conservatory, as a kind of alumni concert, and basically it was to showcase improvisation in some ways. And I told her, okay, come up with 3 words. And somehow she came up with 3 words, and we said, okay, we're going to do 4 movement work. We're going to improvise 4 movements. And we just kind of came up with some kind of ideas what to do. And we improvised, and it was just such an easy thing to do, because she is just so easygoing, but so driven at the same time. And it makes my job much easier. So yeah, I'm definitely lucky to work with her. But yeah, it's just, I've been thinking about, a lot of live concerts, back in the days. And I'm hoping, as a pianist, maybe I can take an advantage in the sense that I could perform with the mask on.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And considering I never liked, long concerts anyway. So an hour is long, more than enough. But yeah, it's something where, I do feel the need to perform, more and more. And especially the fact that, as much as this keyboard that I have, that I got from my colleague's friend, and she lent it to me for a long time, and I haven't essentially played on a piano for a good 5 months now, and that's hard. That has affected me quite a bit. But this keeps me going, even though it's still, it's a viable keyboard, but still, I still want that, piano feeling. And I'm kind of looking forward to going back to work, and very scared at the same time. Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know what's going to happen. So,
Well, I have to trust that there are safe ways to do at least some of these activities. You mentioned the hybrid
Yeah,
model
yeah,
education.
yeah,
Hmm.
at NEC. So, I think we'll do what we can. And the thing is, during that, even though it does sound bleak in so many ways, I think doing these kind of things to even this kind of podcast essentially is some kind of outlet, at least for me. I mean, and just talking to you I'm already inspired in the sense that you have all these ideas and how to go about in something as mundane as 4 minute infomercial and making an opera out of it. I mean, it's quite inspiring, and I'm learning a lot, quite a bit. And if look, if COVID never happened, I would never be doing this. So I should be saying I should be thankful for that in that sense. Um, but
This is
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah,
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. I think this is very worth doing.
yeah. I think so too. I think so too. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and hope to see you at the watch party.
Yeah, I've got it in my calendar. It's
Great,
wonderful to talk to you.
great. Same here. Same here. And this concludes this episode of Gorilla Opera Podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and hope to see you at the watch party of Let's Make a Sandwich by Curtis Hughes and Rudolph Royan on September 24th. Till then.